There are all kinds of signs that tell you what to do when you need help. But what about when you just want to give it? We know where to find good help and where it belongs.
I think people volunteer during disaster because they want to be of service to their community. They want to help out. Their hearts go out to those that are suffering losses, so they want to be able to play a part in making things better.
Usually what we find is when people arrive at the scene, we don't know all of their skills, yet we know there's a lot of talent in the community.
Volunteers are critically important during a disaster response because no jurisdiction anywhere in the country has enough trained first responders to meet the needs to save lives and protect property. And without planning for the use of volunteers, the jurisdiction could be overwhelmed by people wanting to help during the disaster response and during the disaster recovery. Volunteers will come and volunteer whether you're ready for them or not.
Spontaneous Volunteer is a member of the community who comes forward during any type of disaster and wants to be able to contribute.
Hello there, where's the Emergency Volunteer Center?
It's right over there, through those doors.
Okay.
They are not previously affiliated with some type of organization, and yet they still have a need to make a difference. If you don't have a plan, people will in fact find something to do on their own. And if that happens, they very often then can contribute to the problem as opposed to being a solution.
An Emergency Volunteer Center is a way for communities to organize the response of spontaneous volunteers.
They're taking that burden of managing volunteers off the local government emergency operations center.
Joshua Jennings.
It gives the public and emergency response agencies a coordinated system for registering and placing volunteers in time of disaster.
People that want to volunteer their assistance in a large-scale emergency or disaster have a place to go. And when they go there, there's trained staff, there's processes, procedures, and they can take the skills and ability of those people that want to respond and get them out to the right place where they're needed.
The community finds out about emergency volunteer centers primarily through the media because they're the ones that are being able to let people know when and where they can go to help.
The key partners in a successful emergency volunteer center are the first responders who redirect people to the emergency volunteer center, the media who send out the messages to the community about how to help in a disaster, and all the other disaster response organizations who both redirect volunteers and let us know what their needs are so we can dispatch volunteers out to them.
Community-based organizations rely heavily on the services provided by emergency volunteer centers in order to continue services during a disaster.
And there are any number of things that these volunteers can do to help us in our efforts. For instance, in a disaster we may find that we have animals that are not being cared for. They could help us care for animals. A whole host of things that the police officers or firefighters simply either don't have the skills themselves to do or don't have the time or capacity to do.
An emergency volunteer center can be activated at the first sign of a disaster if there's warning. So for example, in a flood, you might activate the center in order to get people out and work on sandbagging or evacuation.
We need to set up the station. You were briefed on the disaster itself.
It can be activated after a disaster in response, as in the case with an earthquake or something where you don't have much warning.
It is our hub of information where we can call in to gather information about what's happening, what are the needs of the community, and we can also be providing that information of what we have that's available that perhaps the first responders and other organizations can benefit from.
I can communicate with the volunteer center, and those resources that have been allocated and previously planned for are ready to go.
It's a great benefit not only for the fire service, but for all first responders as well as the community that we're serving.
All partners in disaster preparedness and response can help raise awareness about emergency volunteer centers through their own promotions, their own training of their staff, and their own communications with the public.
Public information officers and the media support emergency volunteer centers by working cooperatively, letting people know that an emergency volunteer center has been opened, what the location is and what the hours are.
Elected officials play a key role because they are figuratively the heads and the voices and the face of a community. And when they support a volunteer center, they raise that profile and they make the volunteer center a full member of the emergency response team for their community.
The Emergency Volunteer Center is successful when both the volunteer center staff and the local government staff have been prepared and trained together in advance and have a plan in place.
As first responders, I think it's very important for us to support the concept of emergency volunteer centers. We are very appreciative of the public's help, particularly in a large-scale emergency.
So it's important that first responders direct these individuals who are responding to the emergency volunteer centers. While they're at the centers, those individuals can then triage their skills, and then it's incumbent upon first responders to communicate what we need to those centers so that they can help send people who could be of assistance to us to our locations.
Community-based organizations support emergency volunteer centers by planning ahead, ensuring that we have the appropriate job descriptions in place so when a disaster does occur, we're able to move quickly and implement the use of those volunteers.
Community-based organizations can talk about the importance of preparedness for disaster and how the emergency volunteer centers can help coordinate the communication and networking after disaster.
The best thing that emergency managers can do to support volunteer centers is integrate them into their planning, their training, their exercise program well before the disaster.
We need to start thinking of the emergency volunteer centers as a checklist on our operational plan. It just is something you do in every disaster or emergency. To the extent we're able to do that, we'll begin to realize the benefits that can come from including them in our operational plan.